Do you have your ID on you?
No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to give you my ID. I don't
Okay,
need
sir.
to.
Turn your hand and put your hand behind your back. You're under arrest for arson.
Arson. Arson. Oh, good God! You got to be kidding me. Y'all are some of the dumbest I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, you're welcome to your opinion, sir, but it doesn't really matter to me.
Arson.
If you knew the statute, you would understand what it is. Step this way, sir.
On November 10th, 2025, officers Holder and Goodman of the Brownwood Police Department responded to a call reporting that 70-year-old Joe Cooksey was burning grass in his yard using a propane tank and blower torch. Upon arrival, the officers reference a burn ban, and one officer immediately states the activity qualifies as arson.
Holder with the Brownwood Police Department, and we're here about the burning the grass here.
This interaction begins as a routine complaint response. Officer Holder approaches Mr. Cooksey and explains that they are there regarding burning the grass. At this stage, the encounter is investigative, not accusatory. The officer has received a call and is attempting to gather information.
Burning the grass. Well, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Singeing the grass.
Notice how quickly the framing of the issue becomes important. Mr. Cooksey immediately pushes back on the terminology, correcting burning to singeing. That distinction matters legally. Burning suggests an active fire with potential spread, while singeing implies controlled, limited application of heat. In fire code enforcement, these nuances can influence whether conduct qualifies as open burning or merely incidental flame use.
Trying to kill the grass burrs in the damn yard.
Okay. So, do you have your ID on you?
No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to give you my ID. I don't need to.
Okay, sir. Turn your hand and put your hand behind your back. You're under arrest for arson.
In most jurisdictions, including Texas, burn ban violations are typically handled as citations, warnings, misdemeanor level enforcement. Arson, however, is a felony offense requiring specific legal elements.
Arson. Arson. Oh, good God! You got to be kidding me. Y'all are some of the dumbest I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, you're welcome to your opinion, sir, but it doesn't really matter to me. Step this way, sir.
Hey,
I don't answer questions, sir.
Under the Fourth Amendment, an arrest must be supported by probable cause. Probable cause requires specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable officer to believe a crime has been committed. It cannot be based on disrespect, argument, refusal to answer questions.
You're a dumb.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm a what? You got your body cam going?
What do you think?
You got. Well, I hope you do.
Cause what? Cause what?
Arson. I'm burning what? I'm burning seeds.
Under Texas law, a person is required to identify themselves only if they are lawfully arrested. Providing false identification during detention can be a crime. Refusal to identify during a mere investigation is generally not a crime. Mr. Cooksey claims, "You arrested me because I wouldn't give you my ID." If true, that would be problematic, because refusal alone, without lawful arrest, does not create probable cause for a separate offense. So the legality hinges entirely on whether probable cause for arson existed independent of the ID refusal.
No, and you wanted my ID, and you decided you would arrest me because I didn't give you. And you're arresting me for what?
I've already explained the charge to you, sir. It's for arson. Okay?
What? Arson. Explain to me what arson is.
When Mr. Cooksey declines to provide identification, the officers move forward with an arrest for arson while he is standing on his front porch. Before we even examine whether the fire-related conduct rises to the level of arson, we need to unpack two separate constitutional issues: identification requirements and the legal significance of where the arrest occurs. Under Texas law, specifically Section 38.02 of the Texas Penal Code, a person commits an offense if they refuse to provide their name, residence address, or date of birth after they have been lawfully arrested. The key phrase here is after a lawful arrest. The statute does not create a blanket requirement that citizens must identify themselves whenever an officer asks. During a consensual encounter, there is no obligation to provide identification. even during a temporary detention. Texas law does not criminalize mere refusal to identify, though providing false information during a detention can be illegal. This distinction is important because constitutional protections under the Fourth Amendment require that the government justify its intrusion. In the 1968 case of Terry v. Ohio, the Supreme Court established that officers may briefly detain a person if they have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. But reasonable suspicion does not automatically create a duty to identify oneself, unless state law specifically requires it. In fact, in Heibel v. 6th Judicial District Court, 2004, the Supreme Court upheld a Nevada law that required identification during a lawful stop, but that ruling was based on Nevada's statute. Texas law is narrower. It only criminalizes refusal after arrest. So if Mr. Cooksey was merely being questioned and had not yet been lawfully arrested, a court would likely conclude that he had the right to decline the officer's request for identification.
Ease up.
Walk with me.
Ease up.
Watch your mouth, sir.
No, I don't.
The officer tells him, "Watch your mouth." Legally, an officer can instruct someone to calm down. However, officers cannot create new criminal liability simply because they dislike speech. Police authority does not include controlling tone unless it interferes with lawful duties or creates safety concerns. Under the First Amendment, speech directed at police, even offensive or vulgar speech, is generally protected. The U.S. Supreme Court has consistently held that police officers are expected to exercise restraint. Verbal criticism alone does not justify arrest or additional charges. Courts do not evaluate arrests based on tone. They evaluate them based on facts, legal elements, objective reasonableness. Disrespect cannot substitute for probable cause.
You can talk to your attorney and they can get all that
I
in the
don't
court.
need to talk to my attorney. I'm gonna.
The officer tells him, "You can talk to your attorney and get it out in court." Legally, officers are not required to debate statutes roadside. Officers are not constitutionally required to provide legal education during arrest. They are required only to have lawful justification. However, from a procedural standpoint, when a citizen is confused about the charge, explaining the elements can sometimes de-escalate the situation.
What you did? You said, "Give me your ID." I said, "I'm not going to give it to you."
All right,
And
go ahead.
you arrested me because I wouldn't give you your ID.
Come
But
back
I
there.
only have
Come
to.
back there.
I
This way,
only,
sir.
I only have
This
to.
way, sir.
636 Brownwood. I've got 27 when you're ready.
I'm 70.
This way, sir.
I only have
This
to-
way, sir.
Just ease up.
Okay.
Ease up. I'm 70 years old.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Well, you need to loosen up these cuffs.
Okay. When we
Mr. Cooksey begins complaining that the cuffs are too tight. This is one of the most litigated aspects of arrest procedures under the Fourth Amendment. Under Graham v. Connor, 1989, claims of excessive force are analyzed under an objective reasonableness standard. Courts ask whether the officer's actions were reasonable in light of the circumstances confronting them at the time, not based on hindsight. Importantly, even relatively minor force, such as handcuffing, can become unconstitutional if applied in an unreasonable manner.
All right, are you in there pretty good? Turn this way and let me take a look at the cuffs here real quick, okay?
Yeah, they're tight.
So that's 2 fingers right there,
Well, whatever you got going.
and that's 2 fingers right there, okay? They're not too tight, so I'm
When a suspect complains that handcuffs are too tight, courts typically look at several factors. Did the suspect clearly communicate discomfort? Did the officer check the tightness? Did the officer ignore obvious signs of injury? Was there lasting injury? Here, the officer performs what is commonly called the two-finger check. This is a widely taught guideline in law enforcement training. The idea is that if 2 fingers can fit between the wrist and the cuffs are generally considered properly applied, not excessively tight. However, compliance with a 2-finger rule is not automatic immunity. If a suspect continues to complain of pain, officers are expected to reassess if circumstances permit. What's critical is whether the officer deliberately ignored a credible risk of injury. Another important factor is the threat level. Mr. Cooksey is nearly 70 years old and repeatedly states he has no weapons. Age does not prevent handcuffing, but it can be relevant to the proportionality of force. Under Graham, courts consider the severity of the crime, the threat posed by the suspect, and whether the suspect is actively resisting.
Would you like us to secure your front door lock for you, sir?
No, I don't want you to go into my house.
I'm not going to go into your house, sir.
And you're saying I'm accused of arson.
That's what you're...
At this stage of the encounter, the officers ask Mr. Cooksey whether his home is locked and whether he would like them to secure it. This may seem like a minor detail, but constitutionally, it's significant. Under the Fourth Amendment, the home receives the highest level of protection against government intrusion. Warrantless entry into a home is presumptively unconstitutional unless there is consent, exigent circumstances, or another recognized exception. When officers ask whether they can secure the door, they are essentially seeking consent to enter for caretaking purposes. Mr. Cooksey clearly refuses consent. He explicitly says he does not want them going into his house. That refusal is legally powerful. Consent must be voluntary and unambiguous. Once a homeowner denies entry, officers cannot enter simply for convenience. Unless there is an emergency, such as a fire actively threatening the structure, they must respect that boundary. The officer responds appropriately by stating he will not go inside. That response aligns with constitutional limits. Courts routinely suppress evidence obtained from warrantless home entries where consent was denied. So at least at this moment, the officers appear to respect the Fourth Amendment line at the threshold of the home. Now let's turn to the location of the arrest, because that matters constitutionally. The Fourth Amendment draws a firm line at the entrance to the home. In Payton v. New York, 1980, the United States Supreme Court held that officers may not enter a person's home to make a routine felony arrest without a warrant unless there is consent or exigent circumstances such as hot pursuit or immediate danger. The home receives the highest level of constitutional protection. However, courts treat front porches differently from interior spaces. While a porch is considered part of the home's curtilage for search purposes, meaning it enjoys some privacy protection, an arrest made on a porch is not automatically treated as occurring inside the home. For example, federal appellate courts have consistently recognized that when a suspect is standing in the doorway or on the front porch and exposed to public view, the arrest is generally treated as occurring in a public place. In United States v. Santana, 1976, the Supreme Court held that a person standing in the doorway of their home was in a public place for arrest purposes. The court reasoned that when an individual voluntarily exposes themselves to public view, they cannot claim the same interior home protection. Applying that principle here, if Mr. Cooksey was standing openly on his porch and not retreating inside, a court would likely treat the arrest as occurring outside the protected interior of the home. That means officers would not necessarily need an arrest warrant, provided they had probable cause. And that brings us back to the central constitutional question.
Cover the bases.
Gotcha.
I know we're in a burn ban right now, but
That's against city ordinance.
yeah,
Burn
against city
anything like
ordinance.
that. It's got to be contained and with a grill over it
Yeah,
and all that
yeah.
good stuff. To be able to-
The officers begin discussing city ordinance violations, burn bans, and statutory authority. This is where the arrest must either stand or fall. First, notice the distinction being made between a city ordinance violation and arson under state law. A burn ban violation is typically enforced under county order or municipal code. These violations often carry misdemeanor penalties. Arson, however, is a felony offense under Texas law. The level of proof required for arson is significantly higher.
Okay. But so burning vegetation in the city with propane.
Yeah, it's a legal burn.
So I took him for arson.
It's not arson.
It's not arson. What is it?
The firefighters mentioned that under the ordinance, burning must be contained and typically limited to cooking purposes. That suggests the conduct may violate local burn regulations. But violating an ordinance does not automatically elevate the conduct to felony arson. The legal elements must still be satisfied.
Legal burn.
It's just legal burn. Usually they tell them put it out.
Okay.
I don't know.
So what class is that?
That one. All the pictures you need to get.
On 10-4.
I don't know.
Under Texas Penal Code Section 28.02, arson, a person commits arson if they start a fire or cause an explosion with intent to destroy or damage a building, habitation, or vehicle, or vegetation, fence, or structure on open space land, or property knowing it is within city limits and insured, fraud context, etc. The key elements are intent to destroy or damage, a qualifying type of property. In some cases, specific circumstances, like city limits or insurance.
Well, the penal code says burning vegetation within the city limits,
Yeah.
whether the fire continue, you know, after the point of ignition or not.
Right. So now if it was the burn over here on his property, that would be arson. But on his
Not on his own property?
Yeah, that's not arson.
Okay.
Remember Mr. Cooksey said, "I'm burning grass to put the seeds out." There's no indication he intended to damage his home, another structure, a neighbor's property, open space land. Intent matters. Arson is a specific intent crime. Burning vegetation alone is not automatically arson. It becomes arson only if it meets the statutory elements, especially intent to destroy qualifying property.
We'll come over and tell him put it out, and if he had a bunch
Yeah.
of burns, then that's when they get to the
Okay.
citation. So.
If you will
Hey,
show Mr.
Sarge.
123.
Hey, I'm out here talking with the fire chief. He says because it's on his own property, it's not going to constitute arson.
The fire chief correctly states, it's not arson, it's just a legal burn. That means likely a city ordinance violation, possibly a citation, not a felony arrest offense. In many Texas municipalities, including places like Brownwood, burning during a burn ban or burning vegetation improperly violates a local ordinance, not the state arson statute. Typically, enforcement is warning, order to extinguish, citation, not a felony arrest.
Burn. Yeah, we'll cite him and release him. Okay. Well, I tell you what, you want to give him a verbal warning and just release him? We'll just get him out of here and cut him loose. I don't see the point in that either. But.
Because Mr. Cooksey burned vegetation in his residential yard rather than targeting a building, habitation, or vehicle, and because this occurred on developed property rather than open space land, a court would almost certainly conclude that his conduct does not meet the statutory elements of arson under Texas law.
Yeah, it's not arson. Y'all just go off on something. You want to hear?
Head, that's
You're
what-
welcome to your opinion, sir.
Yeah, I am. You're head.
Here you go, sir. Here's your wallet.
Thank you.
You're released.
Arson is a specific intent crime. The state must show intent to destroy or recklessly damage property, and here the only property affected was grass on his own lot. Courts have routinely held that minor or controlled fires in a residential yard do not constitute arson when no structures are endangered and there is no reckless intent to damage property.